In today's meeting, Nicole Melin, who's a pediatric occupational therapist, talks about the book The Whole Brain Child by Daniel Siegel and gives strategies for connecting with your kids and disciplining even with challenging situations and challenging behavior. I hope you enjoy.
I am an occupational therapist, and I've actually been supervising Angela while she's doing her field work. That's how we met, and I'm really happy to be here and talk about The Whole Brain Child is actually a book, but I know that nobody has time to read books, so we're going to talk about it, and I hope that a lot of it is good takeaway for you. But at the end, Angela does have a list of resources to share with you, where there is so much on YouTube that you can watch. You can watch the author talk about this approach. You can, the first two links under The Whole Brain Child are actually really great summaries of the book. So I know time is a precious commodity. I'm really appreciative that we're here tonight. But if you want more information, there's lots of ways to find it on YouTube and podcasts and things like that. So at the end, she'll share that with you. So the people who wrote The Whole Brain Child, one is a psychiatrist named Daniel Siegel, and then his student who was working with him, Tina Payne Bryson. And he is a psychiatrist, but he really studies something called interpersonal neurobiology. So the really neat thing is he studies all kinds of sciences and how it is really helpful and applies to parenting. So even though I'm an occupational therapist and I work with children, I'm here tonight as a parent and to talk about what I really believe in for parenting. And so I just want to give you the tiniest bit of my background. I think it's important. I did grow up with my biological mom and dad, but very sadly, my dad struggled with alcoholism and untreated bipolar disorder. And he had grown up in a very abusive home, and there was a lot of physical and verbal abuse in my home to everybody in the house when I was growing up. And the worst part was constant explosiveness, and that most interactions were just very volatile. And my mom was really not able to leave for many, many years. The happy ending, I made it through college, and I married the most passive gentleman I could find in any of my college classes. And I was determined that I would be building a family and doing everything differently than my own childhood. And for the first 6 years after graduating from college, I worked as a pediatric occupational therapist, and I was good at it. I was, kind to my kids that I worked with. I was gentle, I was patient, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to be a great mom. I'm going to break all the bad habits that I was raised with. And so then I had 2 boys in 2 years. And when they were babies, it was easy. I was a great mom. And then their terrible 2s hit and their treacherous 3s. And I was slipping very fast into a lot of really horrible things that I didn't think I would repeat. I was definitely flipping out too often and yelling and, wanting to spank the daylights out of my kids when they weren't complying. And that was definitely not the parent that I wanted to be. And about that exact time is when Dan Siegel released this book. And I honestly can't remember how I came across it, but I'm so thankful I did. And it's one of those things that I pick it up all the time and read it. And I come back to stuff and I realize things that I've slipped on doing or can recommit to doing, or, and praise myself for the things that I am getting right. Because we're not striving for perfection. We're just trying to get on the good path. So, because what we're going to talk about tonight is really how all of our experiences shape our brain, and how we, as adults, have been shaped by the experiences we had and the way we were parented. And we have the power to shape the children we care for, their brains and their by the way we, handle situations and parent. So, and there's this incredible concept called neuroplasticity, that our brains are plastic, that they can change all the time. And even today, in an hour when we're done talking, you won't have the same brain that you have right now. That the things we talk about and will change your brain. And so that is why I think that this is an incredible concept to think about when we're parenting our kids, to really understand the brain, understand the true science, neurology, and how we can be better parents, better, when we're working with the kids that we're caring for, that we can help them not just survive, but thrive. So if you want to go to the next slide, Angela, that'd be great. So, and one more. Oh, that's what the book looks like, friends. And then one more. So when somebody tells me that there is something I need to do, I am the kind of person that I'm a hard sell. I really need to know why. It's not enough to just have somebody say, oh, this is a great idea. I really need to understand the why behind it. So, it's really important that we understand that the brain is really complex. And we're going to be talking about there's a left side and a right side, there's an upper brain, a lower brain, and there's different areas of specialization in all of those areas of the brain. And the way we can function at our best is to have a really integrated brain. And that's the point of all of this. So one more slide, Angela. So first, if you think about taking a walnut, if you've ever cracked a walnut, you can see that there's clearly two halves of a nut in there. You've got the left and the right. And that's really kind of what our brain looks like inside our skull. It's very clear we have a left brain and a right brain, and they have different jobs. So the right brain is very holistic and nonverbal. So that means nonverbal means the right brain really pays attention to facial expressions and eye contact and tone of voice and gestures, and it really processes the big picture of things. So it's important for the way we have gut feelings about things and intuition. And this is a very emotional side of our brain. So it's interesting to know that really all babies are born right dominant brains. Like their right brain is just really functioning from about birth to 3 years old. And that's why, I don't know if you can think back to, I'm not sure the ages of all of the families here, but if you can think back to your little ones, if somebody looked at them crossly or just made a funny expression, they might cry suddenly, not really understanding. And that's that right brain dominance. They don't have language skills yet until about 3, where things are really taking off. And next slide, we're going to talk about the left brain. So the left brain, and I love this because you can think about all of the things that the left brain is great at. Start with the letter L for left. So the left brain is very logical. It's very literal, very linguistic. So like I said, that's where your language centers are. It loves linear, so sequence and orders and lists. And it's a good thing to think of letter of the law. When you're left brain dominant, you're very rule bound. So those are the functions that are in the left brain. Like that's what it does to help us with our function. The next slide, please. So when our left brain takes over, when our kids are functioning from a left brain side, sometimes they can't see the big picture of things. They get very bogged down in the rules and the way they think things should have been, and they have trouble relating to another person's feelings. And we'll give some examples of this. But they just can be have a difficult time putting a situation into perspective because they are relying on the things that the left brain does best, being logical, literal, language-based. And that can appear very rigid. And Dan Siegel describes that as when you're trapped on the left side, you might kind of be in an emotional desert because you're being so rule-bound, you're having a difficult time taking other people's perspective. Next slide, please. But if you're dominated by the right brain, the emotional side, then that's where we have trouble thinking logically about a situation. Again, think back to a toddler, because all toddlers are right brain dominant, but our kids, as we're going to talk about, can have these moments where they get stuck in the right brain. So they can have trouble thinking logically about things. They become so fixated on their emotional feelings that they can become very irrational, and they may be focused more on your nonverbal cues rather than your language. So you might be saying, I'm not angry, but if your face is crossed, then they think that you are angry. And so Dan Siegel describes this one as an emotional flood because the emotions are so strong when a child is stuck in the right brain that they are having trouble connecting to actual language and logic and thinking through things. Next slide, please. So this is a graphic that I grabbed from the book, and I think it's just so helpful to, he talks about We all want to go with the flow. We want our children to go with the flow. We want life to be easy, right? Like that's great when we have a really easy, good day. And so going with the flow means being in the middle. We don't want to be too far in chaos, that emotional flood of the right brain, but we don't want to be too close to the bank of rigidity, where if your left brain is dominant and taking over, that you're being super rule bound and logical and not connecting at all with your emotions. So next slide, please. What we want is we want to take those two halves and we want to have an integrated brain. We want what is called horizontal integration because it's from side to side. And because we don't want our kids to be completely emotionally flooded or in an emotional desert. We want balance. We want them to take the feelings of the right brain and the words of the left brain and integrate them into the whole brain. Next slide, please. So one of the things, I love this, what I love about Dan Siegel's book is this book, the Whole Brain book, it has lots of strategies. And the only reason, I love the book. And at the very back, it's what's really fun is so this book actually has 12 strategies. We're definitely not going to get through all 12 tonight, but we are going to get through the most important ones that are the best to start with. But in the very back of the book, he has this great like ages and stages spreadsheet where like what this would look like for each group of kids, 0 to 3, what all of the whole brain strategies would look like for the mid-range, like 3 to 6 year old, and then elementary, and then your older teenagers. And that's really a great tool as a parent because sometimes you just need a little direction for where to start. So when our kids present with a right brain dominance or an emotional meltdown, and most of the time when our kids are having meltdowns, this is what's happening. Their right brain is taking over. They're very emotional. What happens is it's very common as adults because we're not in that emotional state. We are hopefully, in that middle range of going with the flow. And so it is natural that we want to be logical and that we want to talk them through the situation. But unfortunately, what we understand when we really understand how the brain works and when our children are really emotionally upset, they at that point are incapable of connecting to their language on the left side. So they are just very upset, very emotional, reading your nonverbal cues, and really they can't hear what you're saying yet. So that's why this strategy is called connect and redirect. Quite honestly, I like to say connect before you redirect. So what we want to do, how we connect with our kids is to tell them we understand, is to acknowledge their stress and their emotions at that time. We want to connect to their right brain by using all the things that we know the right brain is good at. So we want to use a soft tone of voice, soft touch, a pleasant look on our face. And we just want them to know they're okay. Once we connect with their right brain and we let them know that they're okay, then we can start talking and we can be logical and we can explain the situation. But it's not until then, not until we know that they are calm and collected, that we can start talking. And I think there's a really great analogy about a lifeguard, and that if a lifeguard sees a person drowning in the water, they don't swim out and immediately start lecturing the person about why they swam out so deep or why there's, where's your flotation device? Or, there's no lecturing. They just save the person, right? They just bring them to the side of the pool or the shore and make sure they're okay, and then have that conversation. So I think if everyone as a parent can think about your kids when they are in emotional meltdown, that we want to be the lifeguard in their life. We want to just save them from that situation right then and let them know we are there for them and they're okay. And before we start, talking about why they made those choices, talking about the consequences, all of those things that we tend to do as adults. So, there's an urban myth that if you baby your child, you're going to get a spoiled child. And this is different than that. This is when your child is very emotional, not giving in to what they're demanding. We're going to talk about those upstairs and downstairs tantrums. Don't worry. But Dr. Siegel, there's also, I just love listening to him. To me, the man that wrote this book and many other books is a bit like watching Mr. Rogers, but for grownups. Like, he's just very soothing, and he has just so many wonderful things to say. And if you go to YouTube and just search his name, Dan Siegel, you'll find so many talks that he's given in all kinds of various situations. And he talks about, the 4 S's for kids to come out of life well, to have resilience, to be able to be vaccinated against the hard things in life. And those 4 S's are that they know that they're safe, that they are being seen, that we really see them, we connect with them, we're paying attention to how they are feeling about the life that they're living, that we soothe them, and that we build secure attachments. And that if we do those 4 things, the 4 S's, safe, soothe, seen, and security, that we will develop resilient children. I think that it's really important that we keep that in mind, and that this is a great way. This connect and redirect is a great way to do those things. All right. And I think, sometimes if we just think too about our own situations in life, when terrible things have happened to us, did we want a lecture, or did we want somebody just to hug us and hold us and recognize our upset before we had a conversation about it? And I think when we think about how we like things to be, it helps us think about what works for children too. So on the next slide, another whole brain strategy is called name it to tame it. And when our children have these stressful things happen in their lives, and they are all emotional things are processed in that right brain. That's where our emotional big picture centers are. Unfortunately, when stressful things happen to our kids, they can store those memories in their right brain. And those emotional experiences with all their images and feelings can become really big. And this is where, when kids have phobias or, horrible fears that are based out of something that has happened to them, what is happening is it's being stored there, and it's almost existing on its own in this big emotional capacity. But if we talk about it, we can help connect to the left brain, where those language centers are, where the logic centers are, and we can help make that stressful event a lot more manageable for them. But we have to talk about that, and that's why this is called Name It to Tame It. By talking about stressful events, putting labels on it, explaining, if we actually have names for their feelings, like because sometimes our children, they understand the discomfort, but they might not understand how to describe it with words. Okay, so with Name It to Tame It, again, you're uniting the left and the right brain. We're resulting in a whole brain child, because we're taking a stressful emotional memory that maybe has resulted in a fear or, something that's very triggering for them. And we're going to talk them through it with language and logic, and especially if we can talk to them outside of the stress. So we don't want to necessarily wait until that stressful thing is triggering, but anticipating it, maybe if you're on a drive on your way to a stressful event, talking through it, giving them all of the language and the words that you want them to have to describe the situation. That is this is a strategy for brain integration. So Name It to Tame It. And as on a side note, Name It to Tame It is quite possibly my favorite mantra in the whole world, as Angela knows. I think it applies to just about everything under the sun. I think any challenge and stress that we face in our life can be tamed if we can just name it. And I'm sure it has to do with brain integration as to why I really like that. Brene Brown talks about this kind of stuff a lot. If anybody's familiar with her, about the need, again, it's an urban myth that if you talk about things, that's actually going to make it more stressful. And that is not true at all. Not talking about things, what stressful. So if you'll flip to the next one for me. This is a really important slide because it says integrating ourselves. And I think, as I mentioned when I started talking, I had to do a lot of really facing my own background when I wanted to do a better job parenting, and had to see, what were my triggers? Where was I parenting from? I was parenting from a very emotional right brain dominant. I was reacting very emotionally to my kids and not being logical. And so it's really important. We think about that image we want to go with the flow. We want to be the person in the canoe, not too close to being emotionally, chaos, but not too close to the rigid, that other bank of the river, where we're ignoring the emotional needs of people around us. So Dan Siegel also wrote a book called, with somebody else, I believe, called Parenting from the Inside Out. And that's also going to be on your list of resources. And that particular book is all about doing a lot of reflecting on how our experiences have shaped us and shaped our parenting. And it's a really great book for new parents. If you have anybody in mind, that's always a great resource to share. And there are several YouTube videos that you'll have a link to so that you can get that good information without having to read the book. So I just want to say, Daniel Siegel talks a lot about how we don't have to be perfect parents. And I am definitely not a perfect parent, even though I look at this book all the time. I make tons of mistakes. But he does talk about the importance of repairing when we maybe react too emotionally or react too rigidly, that, we want to reflect on those with our kids, and we want to just repair it, just apologize, and I found that it's very helpful when I explain things to my kids as to why I responded a certain way, because I have triggers from my childhood, issues that cause me to have more of an emotional reaction in certain situations. And I think it's really important to share that and to let them know, we're people we're just trying to do our best. So don't be afraid to talk that out. And as Dr. Siegel says, it's just super important when you're working on those 4 important S's with our kids: safe, soothe, seen, and secure attachments, that we repair relationships sometimes when we need to. So the next slide is going to talk about so we've talked about the left and the right hemispheres and what those 2 sides of the brain do, but we also have a top and bottom part of our brain. We have and I like this because he calls it the upstairs brain and the downstairs brain, and we have a mental staircase that connects the 2. Next slide, please. The downstairs brain is more of our primitive brain. We call this our lizard brain, because it does all the things that we don't have to think about. It controls our body functions, our breathing, our heartbeat, reflexes, fight or flight. All of our sensory processing is controlled in our brainstem. Really strong emotions, anger and fear, our instincts, and our downstairs brain is well developed at birth. So that's why we're going to, when you think about some terrible 2 tantrums, they are originating from the downstairs brain. And then the next slide is the upstairs brain. And the upstairs brain is more of our mammalian brain. This is our complex brain. This is where all of our mental processes take place. So all the really great things. So the good news is, our thinking, our imagining, planning, having control over our emotions and body, self-understanding, empathy, morality, all of those are in our upper brain. But the bad news is our upstairs brain is not fully mature until our mid-20s. So even though we want our kids to have control over their emotions and body, we want our kids to, demonstrate empathy for their siblings and have a great sense of right and wrong, we can't really expect that to be fully developed until their mid-20s. So, but we can help. We can help with that development, and we're going to talk about that. If you can go to the next slide, please. So this is vertical integration. This is upstairs and downstairs. We want to connect them so that they work as a team, because although we don't have our downstairs brain is very automatic, we can help build so that our upstairs brain can help regulate some of those behaviors. And the next slide. Because when we want to help, because we don't want our kids to get trapped downstairs. It's very easy to occur where, and the reason why, when I talked about those automatic things that our downstairs brain does, those are all related to safety. so when you think about your breathing and your heart and your sensory system and your fight or flight, like those are all survival mechanisms. And so it's really easy for our kids, especially anyone who's had traumatic experiences, for their survival brain to be very overreactive, to be in high gear. It just has had to be, right? That it has had to be in high gear to help for survival. And so then our kids can have a lot of behaviors that demonstrate that they're really trapped in that area, that they're having trouble connecting to their upstairs brain, to more of their thinking brain. Our next slide, please. So there are different kinds of tantrums that we're going to see from kids. And so upstairs tantrums, these are thinking tantrums. This is when a child decides to throw a fit. This is when they're acting out or pushing buttons or terrorizing you until they get what they want. And so, and that they can stop this tantrum as soon as it's given in, they stop. And so these kind of tantrums, we don't want to, I think it's funny that Dan Siegel says, never negotiate with a terrorist, that we don't want to give in to these kind of tantrums. And this is probably, is really when, kind of people that, when situations happen that we give into upstairs tantrums, that's when we go down the road of our kids really starting to manipulate us. And he talks about providing limits to try to help your kids control impulses. And I have a limit testing child. My youngest child is what you would call real strong-willed. And so just as a side note, I happen to think that the approach 1, 2, 3 magic is really good for your kids who tend to test limits. So if you have a kiddo that you're thinking about who tends to have a lot of upstairs tantrums, who really has complete control over their mind and body, then that 1, 2, 3 magic can be a helpful approach to try if you want to look into that. But a downstairs tantrum, we can look at the next slide. Those are tantrums where a child is so upset they're not using their upstairs brain, they're not thinking at all. This is that it does not matter what the consequences are. They have no control over their mind or body, kind of what you think of when you think your child has lost their mind or flipped their lid, that no matter what you say, even if you were to give them exactly what they were saying they wanted or change the situation, they could not regroup. This is a downstairs tantrum. And because it is not connected to the upper brain, the author really wants us to not try to talk a lot when they're in this state, kind of like the same idea. So we're again going to use that approach of connect before we redirect. So again, that we don't want to start talking to them because they're just not receptive to language at this point. They're not hearing language because they don't have access to their upper brain. They're trapped in their downstairs brain. So the very first thing we would want to do is just to connect using those right brain techniques, the calm voice, the loving touch. And then we want to engage their upstairs brain by doing the things that will get their upstairs brain active. So we want them to start thinking. But rather than us talking and telling, we want to ask questions. We want to make them start to generate thought. So saying something like, can you tell me why, I can see that you're very upset. Can you tell me why you're upset? Can you tell me what has happened? And when we get them calmly talking to us, then we know that their upstairs brain is now connected again. And that lets us know that we can start, processing through things. But until they've been able to make that connection, we just want to connect with them. And the next strategy, the next whole brain strategy is engage, don't enrage. So sometimes when our kiddos are in a downstairs tantrum and so mad, and if anyone can think to the examples of this in your own life, there are definitely things that I would consider like poking the bear, that if we say a certain thing to our kids, it's just going to make it so much worse. Or if we start, trying to discipline them, right then it's not effective and it just makes them so much angrier. And that is this strategy, engage rather than enrage. So, a lot of times the way you're going to engage is through asking them questions. I want to understand what is happening. I wasn't here to see, I have two boys 2 years apart, so there's lots of sibling fighting. I wasn't in the room. Can you explain to me what happened? Can you tell me about things? The other thing to do is ask them to help solve the problem. When you say, I don't want to make the decision here about who had the toy first. Can you give me some solutions, some things that you think I should do to solve this problem? Those are things that are going to engage the upper thinking brain rather than the downstairs brain that was having that tantrum. So as much as we can get them to participate in the problem solving process, the more we're going to create that integration between the upstairs and the downstairs brain. So on the next slide are just Dan Siegel loves acronyms. And so this is a really good one that when our kids are having meltdowns, we definitely want to pause and consider to halt the meltdown. Are they hungry? Are they angry? Are they lonely? Are they tired? These are things that really will trigger our kids to be less integrated. They're going to have a much harder time thinking logically, processing, because again, think about survival, and that if you are hungry and really angry and really tired or getting sick, your primitive brain is going to be more active because that's your survival brain. So it's going to have a harder time connecting to your logical thinking brain when any of these are a factor. So just a side note of things to consider. The next strategy is the whole brain strategy, number 4, called use it or lose it. And the important thing here is that to recognize that everything our brain does is on a system of pathways. So that the more often we do something, the more automatic it is. Our brain loves automaticity is what that's called. So like, did anybody drive to work today and actually think about their drive? Probably not. You've probably driven that drive, 100 times, 1,000 times, and you don't even think about it. That's a pathway your brain doesn't really have to dedicate a lot of energy and thinking to do. So our brain loves patterns. And so if we can help our kids learn to exercise their brain more often, we can help make these patterns more solid for them. So the more frequent they have opportunities to exercise this integration, all of these techniques, the name it to tame it, the connect before we redirect, like all of these things are going to be easier for our kids if we can try to do it more regularly. And the other thing we want to try to do is do it often and not always in the moment of high stress. Sometimes when in the moments of high stress, you just got to walk away, right? You just are like, I need a break. I'm going to think about how I'm going to respond to this. But if you've laid a lot of groundwork ahead of time and really started talking about things and using, connecting the right brain and the left brain by name it to tame it and talking through things, it's going to really help you in moments of high stress and an emergency when you need to apply this. So as often as we can help our kids and to remember that all of those upper level thinking skills are not fully mature until their mid-20s, and that it's our job to teach them how to be, logical, how to teach them how to think about another person's perspective, morality and empathy, how to, teach them about consequences and things like that. That's a process. It's not going to happen overnight. And that our teenagers are definitely not going to have those skills, even when our teenagers might look like adults. They might be, my 14-year-old is 180 pounds and 6 foot tall, but he does not have a fully developed upstairs brain. And so we still make a lot of bad choices and we have to talk through things a lot. And on that note, I want to say that on the list of resources you're going to get, there's a really great book called No Drama Discipline that Dr. Siegel wrote about discipline techniques. And because he says the important thing is, so often people think of discipline as like reacting and punishing, but really discipline is teaching. And so we want to think about that. And then there's another book that I am completely in love with right now in dealing with my teenagers called Brainstorm. And it's the power and purpose of a teenage brain. So if you have teenagers in your home, there are several YouTube links so that you can get some synopses on that book and might find that helpful as well. Okay. Next slide, please. So when we exercise the upstairs brain, really what we want to try to help our kids learn sound decision making. So, we want to talk about things before it happens, but we also want to talk about things after they happen. So, and not in stressful moments of they came home and they crashed the car and you're like that moment, but much later, once everybody is calm and in a good mental state, what could you have done differently? Let's learn from this situation. And you want your kids not, because I think so often as parents, we just talk, but we need them to, we want to give them the opportunity. We want to say to them, tell me what you could have done differently. Tell me, what are the pros and cons of this decision? The more we have our children actively participating in the process of thinking through things, making decisions, using that upstairs brain, the better they're going to be at using it when they need to. So we also want to work with them to control their emotions in their body. So, teaching them breathing techniques and how to calm down, and, and talking through when we put these techniques into place, I think it's fantastic to talk through it with them, to say, I thought about giving you a lecture right now, but I think right now we're just gonna sit, and I'm gonna give you a big hug, and we're just gonna be in this moment, and we'll talk about this later. Kind of telling them exactly why you're doing the things you're doing is going to help them apply those same skills. So self and understanding is definitely a lot of asking them why, making them talk through things. Empathy, obviously considering other people's feelings, that doesn't come automatically, that our kids are working on that skill. And then morality, a sense of right and wrong. And I just think it's very important that we have these conversations really, not just during high stress situations, but really also when they're in calm places and things are, which I think the thing is it's really easy not to do this when we're at a calm place, isn't it? And sometimes, when we only think to work on these things when we're in stressful situations. So if you can, to try to focus some of this when things are less stressful. Okay, now there's several slides here, but I'm going to have you skip ahead, Angela, because I kind of have just briefly touched on each of these. And let's go to the whole brain strategy number 5, move it or lose it. I love this one because I am an occupational therapist and I love movement and believe completely in the connection between our brain and our body. And this is all about that. This strategy is based in the science that when we change our physical state through movement, we will change our emotional state. And that's because exercise releases all kinds of really great neurochemicals. It releases endorphins, and that helps reduce stress. It releases dopamine and norepinephrine and serotonin, and all of those things help balance our stress hormones, and it helps increase our sense of well-being. So basically, any kind of movement is going to elicit our feel-good chemicals. So when our kids are in a heightened state of stress or a heightened state of emotional fragility, it is a great idea to try to get them to get off the couch, to put the video game controller down, and to go for a walk with you, or to just do whatever they like. Playing basketball, skateboarding, just getting outside, getting moving is really going to help their brain, because it's going to release neurochemicals that are neurologically proven to really help relax them. So move it or lose it. So that's I'm actually going to stop right there. There are some more slides. Dan Siegel in this book gets into memories and kind of the importance of how you address memories. And but like I said, if you take a look at some of those YouTube links, you're going to get the full picture of this. And if Angela, you'll go to the very last slide. I just want to end by saying that the reason why I love this whole brain approach is it really promotes connection between adults and children. And there's another author that I love named Becky Bailey, who does a lot of work in programs that schools use. So I don't know if you have any younger children, but if you're familiar with conscious discipline, but Becky Bailey has a saying that connections build cooperation. So when our kids feel connected to us, we're more likely to get cooperation from them. And so I love this approach because it really makes us pause. And if nothing else, if you don't remember a single whole brain strategy, but you just remember to connect when they're upset, to emotionally connect before we start talking them. I've got teenagers that make bad choices all day and night, and it's so easy to want to lecture them and correct them all the time. And it just doesn't ever seem to help. What helps is the connecting with them, the letting them know I'm here for them. And once they are feeling safe and secure, then we process through the decisions they made and how they could have made different decisions. But Dr. Siegel talks about why we all want our kids to have integrated brains. We want them to reach their maximum potential. We want them to have a life filled with meaning and kindness and flexibility and resilience. And when we use these tools, we are definitely more likely to achieve that.
Thank you for tuning in. All the information Nicole talked about can be found on our website. And if you'd like to be added to the email list to get more information, you can email me at prov12@osumc.edu.